hello. It's your girl Camille B, the HR counselor. I am super excited to introduce to you all Miss Joan C. Smith, who is the CEO and founder of Premier Career Coaching. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Joan.
And thank you so much for having me on board to speak with your audience. I'm looking forward to interacting in this interesting topic. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Welcome. So, the conversation that Joan and I are going to have today is transitioning into HR and why it's so important to have a career coach. So, Joan, I know that you are transitioning, right? You're in that space where you're transitioning into HR. But why do you think it's so important to have a career coach?
First of all, again, that's a great question. And thank you so much for asking it. I found as I started my journey officially, maybe about 7 years ago, that as I was going through certain challenges and bumps in the application process, in the interview process, especially at that time, the first couple of years I was applying for internal roles with my now former employer, I found that I was struggling. And even though I pride myself at studying and preparing for interviews and things like that, but there were just some things that I was just not prepared for. And so I found what I started doing was at the time that I was interviewing, probably about 7 years ago, just various, not a whole lot of interviews. I found that I was hiring what I call, this is just my own terminology, a one-off coach. So I would, maybe go on LinkedIn and I find a coach, or maybe like you hear a webinar, say, oh, you check the person out. And I would get assistance on certain things like maybe my resume or, get mock interviews and things like that. And that was fine and good. But as I progressed in recent years, I realized that for me, anyway, just having a coach off a one-off is just not enough when you're still not there. I feel that having a coach keeps you accountable.
Right.
It keeps the encouragement up because a lot of industries, regardless, way before this great resignation and all the things that are going on now, HR is very, very hard to break into. Two general reasons that I found is once people get in, they stay in, which is a good thing. And even if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics stats, HR is still a growing industry, but people stay once they get in and they move around. And so, which is good. And so the other thing that I found is sometimes among HR professionals, HR seems to be harder on HR. So that's just been my experience. So I'm saying to say having a coach can sort of get you through some of these hurdles. It's still going to be work. There's still going to be a process, but it can maybe speed some things up that you otherwise may be running into yourself that you don't necessarily have to go through. So those are some general reasons why I think having a coach, and we'll talk about what type of coach, is very important in this journey. And as you try to pivot into human resources.
I love it. I love it. You're on it, Joan. You're on it. So I love the fact that you understand as an HR professional myself, going on almost 21 years, it is extremely hard to get in the door and then to move within different realms. And there's so many different facets of HR. We have our employee relations, our compensation and benefits. You have your strategic business partners. You have your learning and development team, and then if you love the data and you're all about that analytics, you can go that HRIS route as well. But I really want to bring up a point too about transitioning into HR after being in a different career, because I know individuals who have been teachers in the past and they decided they wanted to come into this realm, right? Into this profession, and it has been difficult for them. And one thing I found interesting is that I have advised people personally to go the staffing route. I know. People probably are going to be like, what? The staffing route. But I say that because in staffing and recruiting, it's a one-stop shop, right? And so a lot of times when you start, they're more, I would say, generous and allowing people with from various different backgrounds to go into that field, right? And when you work for, depending on the staffing agency, you can get a lot of skills. So whether it's the employee relations, a little bit of sales, and surprisingly, being an HR professional, you have to be able to sell, right?
Yeah.
Because you're selling an idea, a plan to the leaders that we support. So I just
That's
wanted to definitely throw out there that for individuals thinking on how they could transition into this field from a different field or profession, going the staffing and recruiting route may be something they would consider, because when you get into that organization and that staffing company, they teach you a lot of different things: how to do payroll, employee relations, recruiting. You may be doing some training for the customers that you support. So that's a great, great way. But you did mention something at the tail end of the conversation, or when you were speaking. You mentioned, but what kind of career coach? So educate the people, Joan. Educate the people on what type of career coach do they need, or
Okay.
you would recommend.
Okay, certainly. Let me just, if you don't mind, piggyback on what you just said about getting in through training and recruiting,
Sure.
because I've belonged to several HR groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, and particularly they're very active on Facebook. And some will say this easy. And again, I think a lot of that depends on the area of the country you're in.
Yes.
It is not easy in this area here. I'm in the DC area because I'm still trying. I've tried that route. I've been there, and I have well over 90% transferable skills. A lot of it's timing. And I know, there's a lot of other things, but even if you have those skills, the customer service skills, the administrative skills, the training skills, and you have that on your resume, you mentioned it, you know how to put that out there and market yourself, it can still be difficult to get in. That's the whole thing, is getting in there. Once you get in, it probably gets a little easier to get that experience to move around. But the hardest part is sort of jumping in. But
Absolutely.
getting to the question of what it takes, or what my experience has been in terms of what a person should look for in a career coach. These are just some things, and I jotted them down, that I think a person should look for. Number one, they should look for a person with HR experience. And I know that may seem obvious, but there are a lot of career coaches, and there's nothing wrong with this, that do not have HR experience. They might have
That's
a
right.
coaching certification, which again, these are not criticisms, these are just observations. They may have a coaching certification, they may have come from a business background, they may have come from like another type of background, and not necessarily, or they may have been, like you mentioned, a trainer, which is nothing wrong with that. And they may not necessarily have HR, like you mentioned, recruiting, employee relations, L&D, what else? Compensation, things like that. Doing investigations, more legal, HRIS. They may not have any of that. And to me, when a person's looking, they should look at the person, see what type of presence do they have on LinkedIn. Because again, if they're a career coach and they haven't posted anything in a year, that for me, that's a problem. For me, that's a
Absolutely.
problem. Or if their connections are low, that means, especially if they're calling themselves a recruiter. I saw a person that reached out to me a few weeks ago. I looked on their LinkedIn profile. They're a recruiter, and they looked like they were new to that particular. They only had like 20 something connections. I'm like, okay, that means. But then when I read their about was about IT. So they're really IT, and they probably just got hired as a recruiter recently as a side gig to maybe hold them over. And that's fine and good. But I'm saying these things to say these are things that people ought to look for. Number two, they ought to look for the type of HR experience that person has. Has the person
Absolutely.
progressed, or did they just come in from one industry and start maybe at a mid-level manager, and work their way up to like a VP or a senior level? Or did they start from the ground, like as an assistant, a coordinator, or a generalist, and then work their way up to a business partner? Then do they have the track record? In my opinion, that person may be able to help the applicant, because they're going to know what that applicant went through. They're going to have those challenges with the coworkers, or with the types of different management personalities and things like that, where somebody just coming in from a manager may not have those experiences. So that's another thing. Then look at their presence, not just on LinkedIn, but when you Google their name or search their name, look at what they're doing on other platforms. For instance, I had a coach about 2.5 years ago. They had their podcast, but then they were guests on other podcasts. So I started listening to them on other podcasts, and I learned things about their journey in terms of, they were in HR for 20 years, how they things that they were going through while they were trying to pivot out of HR to their own coaching and consulting business. And so it's not that they're hiding anything, but different types of podcasts and different types of interviews are going to render different responses. And so if they are doing interviews on other platforms, other podcasts, even if it's not an HR or career podcast, those are things you want to know, because you want to know more about that individual. But the main thing is, for me, the main caveats they have to have an HR background, and they have to have been worked in HR for a significant, and I'm not um pigeonholing a number, but you know, it has to be some years. It doesn't have to be 30 or 50 years, but it has to be something, at least maybe 7 to 10 years minimum for me. That's just me, because I'm going to be more comfortable with that. And then to get on that discovery call too, because again, even though that's all good, you want to see if the personality and their style of doing things and whatever type of coaching that they're offering, if that's going to be a fit for your life and your lifestyle. So those are just a few little things.
I like it. I like it, Joan. I love the fact that you said that you need to have a discovery call because you would be surprised. Not everyone in HR is just going to immediately gel with another individual just because of the experience, because there's so many different personality types. We want to make sure it's a good fit. But I also like the fact that you said, look for a person with HR experience. What I have found lately is that everyone, and again, I'm not knocking anybody, but everyone now thinks that they can be a coach. And maybe they can, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be the kind of coach that myself or you are looking for, especially in a situation where you're someone transitioning into HR from a different field. You want to make sure that you're connecting with someone who gets it, like they understand what you need. What's the background like? Perfect example of what you said. I have been in situations where I have reported to someone who was in HR, but they didn't start where I started, right? So they kind of had all this experience in business management and they were very strategic. And so they kind of went from that position into like a strategic or director HR role, but they didn't have the basics, like coming up the ranks, learning
Yeah.
the basic recruiting and training and ER stuff. They didn't have that. So they had to kind of gain that experience on the side. And sometimes it can be difficult because you're looking like, okay, this is the person I'm reporting to, but do they really understand? Like, I may know more than them with some things, but then maybe that's a smart leader, right? You want the smart people around you too. But if you're coming into this field and you're now looking for a coach, is that the right person for you to connect with? Or is it really best to connect with someone who has worked their way from the ground floor up, right? And so I am 100% in agreement with you. I think you want to get a coach that gets it and they understand what it's like coming in with no experience, because that's what you do when you're entry level into HR. That means you have no experience, right? And you're going to start from the ground up. But then the presence you mentioned, look at the presence on LinkedIn and other social media. And that's something I'm glad that you mentioned, because if you're a career coach, not to say that you can't coach people in other areas or you're doing everything on LinkedIn, but you should be visible. I should be able to
Yeah.
find you on other social media platforms, right? Like
Right.
I should be able to find you on YouTube, maybe having, if you don't have a channel, then maybe you are doing interviews with other people on
Yeah.
your channel or their channel. Are you even now the new rage? What is it? TikTok? Everybody's on TikTok. Like, are you on TikTok? Are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook? Like, where where else can I find you? If you only have 15 people following you, I don't know how comfortable I feel putting my career in your hands, right?
Yeah.
And you did mention something, and I'm glad that you did clarify that just because going the staffing and recruiting route may work for some people really depends on where you live. DC is a totally different area too. It's so embedded with like the federal government that that area is no, and really and truly, I'm ex-military, so I get it, right? Like that's a different area. It's a little different when you're like in military towns. DC is a very unique area. So that may not work in a DC where I'm from New York originally. We have staffing services dime a dozen. It may be easier for you to get in from the ground floor in one of those areas versus like a DC. But I did mention staffing and recruiting because I noticed sometimes, depending on where you are, they're willing to give you an opportunity because you have a degree. Like in most staffing companies nowadays, they want you to at least have a 4-year degree. And so
Right.
maybe you get in there and you're able to, maybe you start at the front desk or they teach you how to recruit, and then now you're building your pipeline of candidates and you're putting candidates to work, and maybe there's issues, so then you get a little taste of the employee relations. You're doing documentation because maybe people are late coming into work, so now you're getting that experience dealing with employees and employee engagement, because then we used to do a lot when I was in staffing like 10, 15, about 10 years ago almost. We were doing so much. We would have like ice cream day and take food out to our employees. And so we were big on employee engagement. And I learned so much, coming from out of the military, jumping right into staffing and recruiting in 2001. But I will say this, it was hard for me to transition from working in staffing and recruiting into a corporate HR position. So that's another weird thing because sometimes they don't understand exactly what it is that you do. So it's so important that you get with an HR professional if that's your career coach, which I agree with you 100%, Joan. You need an HR professional if you're trying to get in this field. That should be your career coach, someone in this field, because then they can help you to make sure that you know how to explain and make sure your resume is translatable and it you show those real transferable skills because when that HR professional is reading or the recruiter's looking at your resume, you have it worded in a way where it makes sense. They're like, oh, so they did this and that's comparable to this. Oh, yeah, they could do this job. But that's another thing, too. You want to make sure that the resume looks a certain way because nowadays, when I first started, I used to take my time and look at people's resume. Now,
Nobody,
no one's doing that. No, they're
nobody
like
does.
blink, blink, like no one's doing it, which is it's such a disservice to people. I still feel like we should take the time. We're leaving the machines, right, to be everything is automated. And the machine is like, oh, it doesn't have keywords, so it spits it out. It won't even like highlight like, okay, this is a good candidate. And they could be really missing out on amazing talent
Yes.
because we're not taking the time to review. So I am just like totally amazed with the fact that you get it so well. But what is it about HR that you are so passionate about that you want to be in this crazy, crazy, but I love it profession? What
Well,
is it?
I love HR, and I remember somebody saying, "Well, I was doing this before I realized it." I love the. And, let me just clarify: everybody in the HR doesn't is not a resume writer. I know a lot of people think that, but I love the training part. I love the impartation, the job search workshops, sitting down with people, counseling them, and advising them, and just bringing out the best in them. And you're right, employee relations. That's a whole nother area,
The
but
heart.
with ER, you do, if you notice, there are no entry levels. You have to be on a certain level of HR to go into employee relations because of the seriousness of it. But in recent years, more so now, HR has become more legal. So the more legal things and legal types of things that you deal with, the better that's going to better position you to be able to hopefully, and if you have that package properly on your resume, that would catch the eye of an ATS or a recruiter that takes that what that 6 to 7 seconds to look at the resume.
Absolutely.
But I love all of it, the variety, the people part, and I know I'm not talking about HR is about helping people because I know they tell you not to say that, and I'm not saying that, but I know it's more than that. I like the strategic part because as a business partner, you have to balance the interests of your employees versus the interests of your organization and your CEOs and
Yes.
things like that. So, and that can be very tough when you have certain situations. It's not always easy, but that's a great challenge when the person's able to do that and be able to create that win-win. So those are just some of the things that I love about human resources.
That touches my heart. And you mentioned employee relations, and that is my true passion. I love that. But I know a lot of times we're like in HR, we're like, we don't help people, but we really do because people are the heartbeat of the organization.
Yes.
And so, yes, we look at the bottom line, but there would be no bottom line if there weren't people. So our job is really to have a better understanding of how do we get the best out of our employees so that they can do the best job possible and make the organization profitable, right?
See,
And
Camille, the other thing too is, let me just say this, that's a good challenge because we see these Gallup polls and there's a lot out on employee engagement. The bottom line is it's still a problem. When you've got 67% of the US population that's not engaged, that means only 13% are, and it's worse in other countries. We're still not doing something right here. I don't care how many people that call themselves engagement this and engagement coach. And
yes.
no, something's
We
wrong. It's still not clicking here. But so I love what you're saying because what you're doing, you're trying to close that gap.
gap. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you called it out with the 67% because that 67% is real. I mean, we're talking about 100%. That means 33%. That's the only people that are impressed or
Yeah,
appreciate what we're doing, right?
yeah, 30, yeah,
60
33,
that's
yeah,
33. So
33, yeah.
67% of employees they are not engaged. And that's
That's
because I think a lot of it has to do with the performative work that we're doing now. Right? Like, because we're so much about take this survey. Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? Okay, take the survey, say you're happy. Do you like this? You do So we're not really engaging individuals in the way they want to be engaged. We're
Yes.
doing it from this is what we need. This is where we want the numbers. So this is how we want to do it. When we really need to turn around and say, okay, employees, how do you need us to engage with you? How do you want us to engage with you? What's working and what's not? And until we really are able to have that real conversation and change our mindset and it realize that it's not really about us, but it's how the employees feel, that's when we're going to be able to engage them and really change the tide. So it's a definite fight, but we have so many people stuck in that old school way of thinking too. And there are a lot of people in my field in HR that still have that way of, well, HR knows best. And sometimes we don't. And the numbers are showing, and the great resignation is clearly putting us in our place and letting us know, maybe you don't. So we are living in humbling times for sure.
Yes, yes, and thank you for I meant to say 33, so thank you for saying that 33% are not in are only engaged. So thanks
Engaged.
for bringing that out. Yeah, but there's still a lot of people that aren't.
That's a lot. Yeah, I
Yeah, it
mean,
is. It's a
because
lot.
67 aren't and 33 are.
Yes.
That's you're saying less than half. Like, look at those numbers. Like, yet here you are, Joan, wanting to be involved in this field.
Mhm.
Because you know why? Because you feel like you can make a difference. And you can't. Sometimes people say one person can't make a difference, but you can. If you help one employee, one manager, then in essence, you're helping multiple people because that manager you help will eventually help his employees. That employee that you help will eventually tell other people in the organization and outside of the organization, and it trickles. Now, it may not happen as quickly as we would like it, but over time. And I think we have to just get to a point where we realize that change is not. We live in a microwave society, so as soon as we put something in, we expect to get something out of it, and it's going to take a little bit more time than we anticipated. So it's really requiring that we be patient and that we're constantly trying to see open up ourselves to try different things to see what's working, what could we do better, and what we need to nix across the board. Like we no longer need to do this. So how can individuals reach out to you if they want your expertise, if they want you to be their career coach?
Well, thank you. First of all, they can find me at Premier Career Coaching. I know the links will be in the channel.
Yes.
And also they can find me on LinkedIn. My link will be there. And I am very active on LinkedIn. If you connect or want to follow, I will respond. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And when I say active, I don't have connections as numbers. I do respond to people. I do, if they need any help, even if it's not in my area, I reach out and I do what I can to help. So LinkedIn is the best way, and also the group Premier Career Coaching. So thank you so much for asking that.
You are so welcome. And before we wrap this call up, I got to ask you, what inspired you to start Premier Career Coaching? What is it that it made you say, you know what? I'm going to be a career coach. I'm going to do this.
Well, actually, I kind of put the idea off. I've had an idea in my mind, lingering for about 3.5 years. But I
Oh,
decided,
wow.
some of the things that I went through as a mid-career professional, being disrespected, disregarded, talents and
Oh,
abilities not being utilized, even though I went to the right people, did the right things, went through cohorts, talked to people in HR, did informational interviews within the organization, did that over an 8-year period. And at that point, I'm saying, okay, I need to try to move on. And so just knowing that a lot of women out there are going through that, they have things they want to get, but they're being shut down, whether that's deliberately. So I want to help them bridge that gap so that they can use their talents and use their abilities so that they can shine and that they can be the best that they can be, not only in themselves, but for the organization. If they're not trying to, nobody's trying to take your job. They're trying to do this so they can be a better person for that person's organization. So that's why I started and launched Premier Career Coaching for
oh,
mid-career professional women.
okay. Did you hear that? She threw that in there real quick for mid-career professional women. Number one, thank you so much for doing this with me today, having this conversation. But number two, thank you for stepping out because that's a big thing, right? To step out, take that leap of faith and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, you know, give a service to people that I wish I had. right? When you're trying, and for that mid-career level, it's so hard to kind of transition because sometimes you get stuck. It's like you plateau and you're like,
Yes.
how do I get to that next level? And you're going to everyone, and it's almost like your concerns are falling on deaf ears because they're not
Yes.
saying anything. So to have someone who gets it, because that's really important to me. Because sometimes career coaches, they've never gone through what you've gone through. They don't get it, but they're telling you all these wonderful things, and you're like, they just don't get me, right? But you get it, because you've had those frustrations. I I hate the fact that you didn't get the assistance that you needed, but sometimes you have to have that negative to come up with a positive, and that's what's
Yes.
happened now. So again, I just want to number one, thank you. If you are wanting to connect with Joan, I can attest she is very active on LinkedIn. I talk to her a lot on LinkedIn. So you would go to Joan C, C like Camille, Smith, and you can find her on LinkedIn. And again, she also is the CEO and founder of Premier Career Coaching. I want to thank you again so, so much, Joan, for taking out this time with me today to talk to me and all the individuals who look at my channel. Again, it's your girl, Camille B, the HR counselor. Thank you so much and make it a great day.
Okay.
Ciao.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.